Hi, and welcome to Finding Your Way Through Therapy. I am your host, Steve E.15. I'm an author and mental health counselor. Are you curious about therapy? Do you feel there is a lot of mystery about therapy? Do you wonder what your therapist is doing and why? The goal of this podcast is to make therapy and psychology accessible to all by using real language and straight to the point discussions. This podcast wants to remind you to take care of your mental health, just like you would your physical health. Therapy should not be intimidating. It should be a great way to better health. I will demystify what happens in counseling, discuss topics related to mental health, and discussions you can have with your therapist. I also want to introduce psychology in everyday life, as I feel most of our lives are enmeshed in psychology. I want to introduce the subtle and not so subtle ways psychology plays a factor in our lives. It will be my own mix of thoughts as well as special guests. So join me on this discovery of therapy and psychology. Hi, and welcome to episode 15 of Finding Your Way Through Therapy. We have a returning guest. Sergeant J. Ball has decided to come back, and I'm looking forward to our conversation. I know I did his bio the last time, but just a quick reminder. Jay works as a sergeant for the Framingham Police Department in Framingham, Massachusetts. He holds a Bachelor's of Science degree in criminal justice that he got at the University of Massachusetts in Lowell. He has worked in so many different positions as a police officer. He started off as a Massachusetts Transit Authority officer. He moved on to become an officer in the town of Milford, Massachusetts, where he also became a detective. He has also served as a school resource officer in Framingham, Massachusetts. In addition, he has worked on many task forces, including the Metro West Drug Task Force, and he also serves as a law enforcement liaison to the Middlesex County Veterans Treatment Court in Framingham, Massachusetts. In addition, he is also appointed to the Governor's Opiate Recovery and Remediation Fund and Advisory Council. More importantly, Jay has been talking about a lot of mental health first aid and has been trained since 2018. And in recent years, we've really bonded on the work on that subject. And I always enjoy our conversation, and I hope this one goes as well as the first one. So I hope you enjoy it. And here is Sergeant J. Ball. Hi, and welcome to episode 15 of Finding Your Way Through Therapy. This is an exciting episode. Again, happy to have now Sergeant J. Ball back as a guest. I think we're going to do this every season. I think it's important. There's a lot of stuff that we can talk about. Jay is a sergeant in Framingham, Massachusetts at the police department. He works on several task force across the state, including the governor's task force for opiate abuse overdose. Can't remember exactly.
The remediation fund. The money coming into the state to help with all, the addiction issues that happened over the years with the overprescription of opioid pills that obviously transitioned into the use of heroin and fentanyl and other opiate derivatives.
And also, you've worked in many other settings, but right now, since 2018, you're a trainer in the mental health first aid for the police. And again, I could go on and on for the accolades, but you're a returning guest, so I'm not going to go too long. And honestly, I'm going to start off by telling you that I got a lot of feedback on this episode, and it was all good. And a lot of people were like, well, why don't you have him back on? And here we are. And I think we had already talked about it. And because other people said it independently, I think it was important to do so. So welcome back, Jay.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me again.
I know we talked about a whole lot of different things the last time. So I think that what we're going to do is just going to have a quick conversation about different things. But one of the first things I want to say is that I remember you talking about social media and how police departments can use it. And I think it's a good way to show that police are human, that mental health standpoint, the human standpoint is very important. I certainly saw that your department in Framingham, Massachusetts has just started to use it a little more. And I was wondering if you could expand a little bit on when the last time you talked about it, because you said some of them are used very well and others can be improved upon. So what do you think is a good social media outreach for police at this point?
Through no fault of anyone, our social media, and I've said it to bosses, within the last few years has gotten much, much better. So meaning that we just weren't putting enough out. I don't have any direct effect on our department's social media account, excuse me, platforms, but mainly for police, Facebook is still huge, but Twitter is even better. Twitter just gets out the message, whether it be an unfortunate road closing due to an accident or water main break, for example, or even better, the community outreach, showing, as you said, showing the police are human beings also, but the community outreach showing, listen, last night we were down in Pelham for National Night Out, and we'll be at another Framingham Housing Authority area for another national night out. Or maybe an officer just was on a walking beat, which we do in Framingham now under the new administration, going to businesses, checking in, letting people see us on the street. It's funny because it's a double-edged sword. You've got it out there and you put it out there and people are like, oh, that's great. The police, whether it's Framingham or wherever, the police are out there doing their thing. And then you've got the naysayers that say, oh, they're just showing us the good stuff. To the people, the naysayers that say it's just the good stuff, no, the bad stuff's always in the news. It's the bad things that we have to go to, the unfortunate arrests that have to happen, the unfortunate domestic violence calls we have to respond to. Putting the good things out there, it's a lot harder to find. And I know, at least in our department, we're actively going out there and reaching out to the community. We have a chief and his administration that just believe in that.
And I think that you said it right. I mean, you got the naysayers and people who support it. And what I go back to, in my experience anyway, social media is meant to be more of our positive side anyway. No one puts out their dirt out on social media, whether it's their own Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, or what have you. Then people typically put in their good side. So I can see where people say that, but I also would argue that you can't say that you don't do the same thing, number one. Number two, one of the outreaches that I've seen a lot, and I've seen it from police departments through Florida, through someone in Tennessee, where they also show like, the harder exchanges in order to kind of calm the community down, but also show the police in a very natural light of like how tough it was for them too. So I've seen both sides. What do you say about people maybe seeing that tougher side and seeing how humanized the police and how hard it can be for them too?
It's good for the community. I think it's good for people out there to see what happens. Like you said, not every interaction with the police is a positive one. I think I said it last episode. No one calls 911 and says, "Hey, what's going on? How you doing?" So having it shown on social media, showing what officers went through, what they did, you see a lot with body cams. You see it a lot with dash cams. Obviously dash cams are used a long time ago. Body cams are being used around. Just to put it out there, I speak as myself as J Ball. Sometimes I may say something to do with Framingham PD, but I don't speak for the Framingham Police Department. But getting back to that, with that being said, showing people on social media what goes on day to day. We always see the horrible situation that ends badly, but we don't see how we got there. We don't see the in betweens. We don't see the good. Sometimes the bad situation you show up that ends up good. We don't see those. So those things to make it on social media, very important, not only for the morale of a police department, but the cohesion of a community, because the police has to be part of the community and the community has to be part of the police.
The one thing that you brought up that I've seen this in Massachusetts. I've heard that other more urban areas, such as New York City. I've heard Miami does this a little more. Detroit has done it significantly for maybe about 10 years. But it's that community beat and walking around different areas. I've heard both sides. I've heard that, well, what does that serve the community for? And sometimes it can only make it harder for police. And I've heard that it also humanizes the police and helps the mental health of people who might have been intimidated by the police in the past, but now see them as human beings. Where do you stand on those community beats? And again, just to remind everyone listening, these are the opinions of Jay Ball and not necessarily of anyone else. So we just want to make sure we reemphasize that for everyone.
No, I believe in them. I think it's great because obviously I spent some time not on patrol, most of my career not on patrol. And I would see, oh, geez, hey, there's walking beats tonight, or there are continuing walking beats. And then I end up going out to do some community events, and I hook up with officers that go out and do the walking patrols, and they know everyone. It's like they can walk in a store and they're like, "Oh, Officer so and so, hey, what's going on?" Whether it's just saying hello or someone feeling comfortable with that officer, I don't see a negative to it. I'm sure, yes, I don't know every community in the United States. I don't know how well received the police are in every community, but I think that if we put a face, especially in a downtown area or in housing areas or in areas that maybe we respond to and receive more calls for service, or those communities that are maybe hesitant to call the police, putting officers down there saying hello, smiling, waving. Yeah, not everyone's going to say hello. And sometimes you say that, under your breath, like, "Oh, great to see you too," when someone ignores you. But maybe the second, the third, the fourth time, that person's going to be like, "All right, well, this person keeps showing up here. It's the same officer. Maybe I'll give them a chance." So I'm a believer in them. I always joke with some of the officers that do them, like, you're doing it wrong if you're not walking in, sitting down first thing in the morning, and you need to be that type of person that walks into the bakery in downtown, wherever, we'll say Framingham because that's where I work, and sitting there and having a coffee and letting people going to work and people that go there for maybe the older people that just hang out there, the retirees, letting them see you there. And yeah, maybe you do sit there for 2 hours. And not to get long winded on the topic, but there are going to be people, oh, that officer's just sitting there for 2 hours. Well, guess what? That's where we assign that officer to. We want that officer to sit there from 7 a.m. to 9:30 a.m. We want them to see the people coming and going. Maybe something bad happened at a house the night before and they didn't want to call the police, but the person's going to work or school, and geez, the officer's sitting right there. That's what you're there for. I don't see it a waste having an officer or two sitting at a coffee shop for 2 hours in the morning and then maybe walking to the stores as they open at 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, checking in with them, making sure, the quality of life issues that go on. Not everything's a huge crime, but maybe the trespassing, maybe the disorderly stuff, maybe the people abusing, a store owner, being out there for people.
I tend to agree. I mean, I'm going to save the name of the coffee shop, but when I used to work in Framingham, there's a very big chain in New England. There's one right at the corner of the parole office where I used to work with, and the police department was right across the street. And there would be typically at least one person sitting there. And he became much more approachable. I always saw more and more people around him as the time went on. Going back to a little bit of the mental health side of, I think it helps the community from an outsider's perspective, obviously, for me. How do you feel it affects police officers in general? You talked about your own opinion, but you probably have heard these beats not only in Framingham, but across the country. How do you feel that affects people? Do you feel that the police officers enjoy it, feel that it's helpful, or do they feel like, oh, I still feel yucky or what have you?
I know a lot of police officers across the country, and I don't know too many that actually are on a walking beat. Obviously, in large cities, I have a very good friend from the largest police department in Washington State, and I know right now they don't do them. Do I think they can work in big cities personally? Yes. I think you need to have a unit for that, but like the mid-level cities, even thinking Boston, I'm not speaking of Boston PD, but Boston as a whole, someone said to me today, Boston's just a bigger Halifax. And I never thought of it that way, but it's kind of true. I mean, Boston in the grand scheme of things is a small city. So when you look at the place I work and other places, we're more community oriented, where maybe the whole department has a chance of going out and doing these walking beats or community relations. But I think towards the mental health side, it's we said it last time, humanizing the police officer. I think it takes a special, I think it's good training for everyone, but I think it takes a special type of officer that can go out there every day and be the face of the department or multiple faces of the department. Just like we're people, people may say, geez, I wish, why isn't every officer? We're all different. We're different as human beings. But maybe if someone with lived experience, a police officer, teaching one of my classes, about domestic violence, and I probably said it last show, but is in domestic violence, officers probably grew up in households that didn't have domestic violence. Maybe that's something that gets put out there by an officer and it makes that person more comfortable to disclosing. Maybe it's some sort of sexual assault. Obviously, it affects mental health. Maybe it's an alcohol problem. Police officers suffer, uh, and first responders suffer with alcohol issues, whether they come forward and get help or whether they don't. Maybe that's a lived experience, and some quote unquote peer support that they can pass on to the community and maybe help each other.
There's so many ways we can go with that subject because I think it's very important. I think that lived experience from police officers sometimes can create such a good relationship with the community because they can be like been there, done that personally, not only as a police officer, but I also know that sometimes it could also re-traumatize a police officer. And my experience is that people talk about trauma with police. Honestly, it could be the first one, but more likely it's the 27th one that causes more of that reaction, not the first or second one. Although it does happen. I'm not saying that it doesn't. Do you feel like when, especially with domestic violence or maybe even substance use, I think I've seen police officers go out of their way if they've struggled with that to kind of go out of their way to help out the community, but there is, risks involved with that. Do you feel that like having that lived experience makes the police officer that much of a better police officer, maybe connect more to the community, or do you feel like it's kind of harder for them and even more like hard lined about yes or no, arrest or not, stuff like that?
Yeah, you can see it. You can see a hard line, and I'm not sure if I'm answering the question in the direction, not the direction, but the way it was intended. But it's with police, you figure, oh, this is the police officer. They're, nothing can, they're the strong one. They're, it's either right or wrong, arrest or no arrest, like you said. But you want to let too many people in. Maybe you hear someone's story, they struggle with alcohol or drug abuse, maybe mental health, and it resonates with inside you and says, geez, this person, I can help them. But as a police officer, are they going to think I'm weak for letting them into my, lack of a better term, bubble?
Right.
And maybe the advice you give is based off those experiences, but you don't want to let that person in yet. I know there's people that I've pulled aside with different things from my past, and I give them little pieces just because I think they're struggling. They probably look at me and say, "What does this guy know about this topic?" And yeah, I may not be an expert in anything, but I'll tell them little things, not the whole story, but I'm like, yeah, in the past this has been a struggle. And police officers may do that. They don't want to let everyone in on every part of their personal lives, but putting a little behind it saying, this is why I feel this way. This is something that happened in my life. And I think that helps once again humanize the police officer. And also, it may be theory, like you said, re-traumatize the officer. Yes, um, that that could happen. And I know in your field, and I've talked to a lot of people that therapists and along those lines, and that's a major worry. Don't re-traumatize yourself, but sometimes in certain situations, getting it out, in my opinion, is therapy. It's therapeutic.
I've found that, sometimes it can go both ways. My experience as a therapist that individuals who may fight or not fight, but that's a very bad word here, maybe perceive an element of what they've been through into someone else. It could be therapeutic, cathartic to them to kind of like help out someone else and kind of like help them process the trauma in a good way. But for others, they go back into a fight or flight mode, which is where trauma resides. And that causes a lot of more issues for the officer. So I can see both ways. But, one of the things that I worry about with officers and, I think about them as, obviously you're professionals just like we do. And I think that finding that proper balance can be always the hardest part. I'm a therapist who is, I don't share my life. I mean, I have a therapist for that, but I also share part of my life. And if they're going through certain things that I feel I can relate to, they tend to really like that human side. And they're like, oh, it makes you more real. So I get what you're saying. I don't know if I don't know if I answered the question either, but I think that it was a good way to go anyway. Which, again, I'll just remind everyone that we're listening to Finding Your Way Through Therapy. I am Steve Biso. I'm sitting here with Jay Ball. One of the things that I also wonder about with all of the stuff that we see also with social media and all that, recently it's been like I saw this in Canada. I saw this in a few departments here in Massachusetts, and I'm pretty sure it goes across the country. I know we're having a lot of trouble recruiting police people to become police officers. And there's a lack of police officers in the academy. I know that most departments right now are short for at least, I don't know of one department that I work with that has not at least two or three openings and no one in the academy to take it. Do you believe it's a little bit of what's happened in social media and what we've seen as police officers in a negative way? Do you think it's also people not willing to go that extra mile? Or is it like, oh, I don't want to be traumatized, or I don't want to struggle with that. I'm not going into it. Or is it a combo of something else that I didn't even think about?
No, and you know, you brought up the last part about saying, the traumatized. I haven't heard that, and I don't think along those lines because I don't know. Maybe I've been doing it so long that I don't think someone comes into the job. What you did say about maybe social media, it's been a tough year for geez 2 years for everyone.
Five
There have been
years.
some with that.
Sorry,
Yeah, it's been
I'm talking for myself. Please delete. Um,
so there have been some egregious actions. And not to get into detail, yeah, there have been some actions where the police have done some pretty bad things, but the good things outweigh them. But I see that when you say a college graduate gets out of college, it used to be years and years ago, maybe it was in your family, maybe it was something you wanted to do. You saw a lot of veterans doing it. And once again, my opinion, some veterans right now they're getting out. They've had some trauma. Maybe they don't want to be police officers. I can also see if my kids, if they want, God, I'd love them to be police officers, but I'd honestly have a long talk with them because, yes, it's my career. And yeah, I would like to do some other things, but I don't know what I would do, knock on wood, if I wasn't a police officer. I'm used to it. People say, how can you do it? Everything's being videotaped. Every word you say is being, scrutinized. You can't do this, you can't do that. I love what I do, and that's in the back of my mind. But I can see as a young 23, 24-year-old person graduating college, or maybe not even graduating college, come out of the military, why would they want to be under a microscope? Not saying that police shouldn't, and there shouldn't be repercussions for bad actions, but the overwhelming majority of police officers are good people that go out there every day, do their job, and I just don't see people wanting to be checked constantly and feel like they're in the microscope. Some days I do things and I'm like, I did the right thing. But then I go home, I lay in bed, I'm like, well, that could have been construed this way. That could have been thought of this way. What happens tomorrow morning when they ask me if I meant what I said this way? Me, I did nothing wrong, but everyone's opinion of how things are said or done is always thought of differently in someone else's mind. So we get paid well, especially in our area, but like we were saying, outside of Massachusetts, yeah, police officers don't get paid well in some areas. So that can be also a reason that people don't become police officers.
Sometimes you say that you don't know where to go with this. As a there's so many questions. There's two questions that came to mind. One of them I will bring up later. I think it's relevant. One of the other things that I wonder about too is that I heard recently a chief mention that what's really missing is people willing to work for the community, be of service in the community, and they're looking at a salary versus being a service in the community. Do you feel that being of service in the community brings all the headaches that we see about the police? And again, I agree with you. I talk about the 95-5 rule. 95% of police officers, 95% of therapists, and name the profession. They want to do the right thing. They just want to get through their day and show up for the next day. There's a 5%. Well, they're questionable, and that's just how it is. Do you feel like maybe not being of service in the community, particularly like veterans who did serve for 5 years, 10 years, depending on the person, is playing a factor in that too?
Yeah, I do, and I hate to get it because I haven't done any study on it, but uh, generational wise too. I've done some reading on generations. My generation is different than the current generation. The generation before me, and then we can go all the way back to World War II. And in my opinion, we're nothing like that generation. Generation X is its own way. The traditionalists is their own way. Generation Y is their own way. I think it's a generational thing. Why would I, if I'm going to make X amount of dollars here, and I'm going to be constantly, I could go to jail if I do the wrong thing. I can get fired for do the wrong thing, or something along those lines. Or I can make same X amount here, and I can just, like Dave Matthews song "Ants Marching." I can jump in my car every day, get in the traffic, and go to my job 9 to 5 and come home. Why do I want to deal with the extra stuff as being a police officer?
The scrutiny.
The scrutiny, exactly, which has a direct effect on mental health. So I could see that being it. Policing has changed. Obviously, we've got the warrior ethos, and my opinion's always been, yes, we need to be warriors. Well, we need to be more protectors and guardians. Absolutely. But the warrior part can't go because it sounds cliche and all this stuff. But right now, where I am, I know we're not going to go live with this. It's 10 o'clock at night. I've seen, just where I'm sitting outside, people's house lights go off. They're going to bed. Meanwhile, the police department that's here, or where I am, they're still driving around. They're out there. They may be in a fight. Someone may be breaking into your house. Someone may be trying to rob someone. They've got to be a warrior. Yes, be a guardian also, be a protector. But sometimes to stop crimes, you've got to get into that warrior mentality, that to save yourself and protect the lives of others. So that, getting back to the original question, generationally, it's changed over the years. It used to be the dress uniform for the police, and you walk call box to call box, and then you're in a radio car, and then it's evolved over the years. But I think we're more in a time now where we're noticing, especially with mental health, we're seeing more and more calls for mental health. And I think it was about 10 years ago, people like, oh, these, even officers, oh, we're social workers. It's like, yeah, because there's no plan in place. There was not a plan in place. We just went to every call, and we dealt with it with what I will say, at least 10 years ago, a lack of knowledge for mental health crisis and mental health issues that go on in the street. Because as I said, all these houses' lights just went out. But is there a person walking in the traffic right now? Is there a person in crisis right now? You know, I was at a training a few months ago in a small town in Massachusetts. So, like, great. You just told us everything you can do for us from 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. But what happens at 10 p.m. on a Saturday night? We're the only ones there. And I'm sure it's just not that small town Massachusetts complaining. I think it's a lot of places across North America.
Well, and you bring in that's an excellent point. I think that what I can't remember who had said this to me a long time ago. This is years ago, who had told me that when you go to bed at 10, 9, 11, people sometimes go to bed earlier or later, you have to have someone in the community making sure that there's things going right. And what police officers have faced for 20 to 25 years since the closing of many state hospitals is that they're doing a lot of mental health calls or substance abuse calls at that point, which, again, there's domestic violence, there's other calls. I'm not trying to simplify the overnight work, but I also think that, we had a lot of the communities, in particular, mental health communities, who would go, well, we'll give you someone for social work from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Well, typically that's not when we have the most mental health issues. I mean, and I remember having those conversations, and I think that that's where the police have changed significantly, which also probably plays with the psyche, because we have changed so dramatically from the boomers to where we're at today. And do you think that it's also part of, most police officers that I know want to keep the community safe, and they understand that there's a component of mental health that goes with that? But there's also some people who would say, well, that's not a police job. That's not something police should ever be involved. And, there's those movements of defunding the police and all that stuff, which I am very much opposed to. But what do you think about all that? Do you think that it's because we don't understand what police face on, even like, I know 11 to 7, everyone says, oh, that's the sleepy time. there's a lot of departments. Maybe if you're living in a very small rural town in Vermont, like I did, there's not a whole lot going on. But if you're in medium sized towns or cities, there is stuff going on. Do you think there's a lot of misconception of what police actually do, which plays a factor in not only the recruitment, but people who want to work for the community?
Yes. I mean, once again, with I make X amount over here, I make X, why do I want to deal with it? The other thing is when you're a young officer, and I was lucky. The junior shift at the police department when I first started out was day shift. And I've seen that at our department, other departments now, guys and girls coming on, they're going to days, which is perfect. But they still have a huge shot at going to midnights. And being a midnight officer is not glamorous. It can be very boring. Like you said, everyone's asleep. And like you said, psychologically, it's the sleep patterns you have, is horrible. But as the sun goes down, I don't want to say that crazy is a bad word, but the more intense or the more involved, I would say, the calls are. Someone calls the police at 3:30 in the morning. Think of what you're doing at 3:30 in the morning. If you're the 9 to 5 person, you're asleep for a few more hours. Someone's calling at 3:30 in the morning. It's not good. So it's that adrenaline rush, and you think of it as in recruitment terms. Why do I want to be driving around at 3:30 in the morning going to someone's emergency? Generationally, that has changed over the years,
Right.
and I could see that as being a drawback. Working midnights, no one wants to work midnights. I've read, like I said, I haven't done research, but I've read a few reports. The generation that we have now, that they had the computers, they had all the stuff. They want the instant gratification, instant satisfaction. They want to succeed and be promoted or be in a special unit. Totally understandable. It's different than 20 years ago. But part of it is working midnights and dealing with those calls that, maybe it shows up in the police blotter as, oh yeah, 3 motor vehicle breaks. But was the person breaking into the motor vehicles? Did they have not to just focus on mental health, but that's why we're here. Were they trying to get warm? Were
Right.
they just stealing from the car? Do we treat that person that's smashing someone's window trying to steal their car, which happens? Maybe I got that at 1 o'clock and I'm amped up on it because I just had 3 cars stolen or broken into. But at 1:15 on the other side of the city, I have another car broken into, and it's a person suffering a mental health crisis trying to get warm. But I'm still amped up from the crime that occurred, not the mental health issue, the mental health emergency that's going on. So you got to change hats quickly. And yes, 9 to 5, it can happen. 9 to 5 is what I see as that's our follow-ups. That's when we on the midnights or 4 to 12, we get our phone calls, we get our calls for service. The officer comes up to me and says, "Hey, Sarge, or so and so, I've been here 15 times in the past 2 months." And that's when I'll fire off an email or ask the officer, fire off an email to our JDP supervisor. They may already know these people or this person, but let's flag it for them so they can follow up in the morning to get them services.
Right. The jail diversion program, for those who don't know those initials.
Oh yeah.
Um, I just, and this is, we don't need to do so, but I'm going to plug again, Dr. Abbott, or as I call her, Sarah, for that one. But again, just want to remind everyone, finding your way through therapy. This is the podcast. I'm Steve Easel talking to Jay Ball. Maybe that's a good jumping point here. Maybe talking a little bit of the jail diversion program. I remember getting involved with that program in 2004, 2005. And obviously it's evolved since then, and a lot of departments have bought into it. But one of the things that I hear, and we both know a little bit about the crisis intervention team. There's the CIT programs that are in different areas versus the jail diversion programs, or people who call it differently across the country. I feel that on a mental health standpoint, I've always been a very big proponent of a jail diversion program, which avoids jail altogether and hopefully gets them the help and not have to give them a record. But the CIT program is a little bit on the other side, and I could see the good points of that too, because it can mandate treatment and among other things. What is your view on those mental health programs in general and how they've impacted not only the police that work with them, but the community?
speaking from experience being at, as like you said, Dr. Abbott is a common theme. We're lucky because I see Framingham as the starting point and all the work Dr. Abbott did. I think our department, it's not even a thought. You see other departments will say, "Oh, I don't want a clinician here. I don't want." It's not even a thought in our department. We love our clinicians. They're special in a way of any one of them could be a police officer. Maybe they don't want to be a police officer, but any one of them, they understand, they get it, they know the mentality, they can deal with personalities of police officers. It's no less of a clinician or a therapist riding that doesn't want to ride with the police, I should say. It's just a different skill set. So on the JDP, which I also like to call co-response now, we have just bought in. Not only helps the community, but it trains the officers riding with these clinicians. No one complains. No one says, "Oh, I don't want to take the clinician." You want to. It's just a benefit for the community.
The work that Dr. Abbott has done is something that I brag about, even the people who, I was involved here and there while it was starting. And obviously, it's evolved to such a great program, not only in Framingham, but several Massachusetts, but it's in several communities in Massachusetts. It's been replicated in different states. Even when I was in Vermont in '09, they had something similar that they practice. But I also know that the Memphis model and the Miami-Dade model, which is more of a CIT program, really works well. Do you feel that one of the program is better than the other? I've kind of exposed my point of view on that, but do you see any difference, or do you see work for the police at least? Do you feel like the police can understand, or not understand? That's a harsh word. Be more comprehensive one over the other.
I don't. And as you know, I was lucky enough attend the CIT International Conference in Arizona last month. And it's funny, some people said to me, "Oh, wow, you're going to enemy territory." And my reason for going was twofold. One, myself and a lieutenant from our department, we got certified in CIT. It's not a program we have at our PD because we're in co-response. But as I kind of spoke to some superiors about it, one, I'd like to develop more classes for the community and also for our police department. And that transitions to we don't need to pick one or the other, in my opinion. I will never be a chief of police, but if I was, I would have both. I would have a CIT team trained. So CIT, we keep saying the initials, crisis intervention team. It's knowing who you have for assets in the community. It's knowing where you can turn for help. It's knowing responses. But I think, which is not a well held thought, it's either some people, it's one or the other. I think we can have embedded co-responders, and we'll get to embedded co-responders in a minute, along with CIT. I think we should have all officers who want to be trained in CIT trained. The one thing I do see with CIT is it's a myriad of classes. So people that will the cons of CIT that people will tell me is there's no formal structure to it. It's showing resources. It's training officers and training clinicians in mental health responses. And I don't see that as a con. I see that as more training.
Right.
The pros to it, well, some people's thoughts is, well, we can reduce the police's response to mental health crisis and we'll send a mental health professional. Outstanding. I'm not disagreeing with that. But how do I put this nicely? I met a doctor from a state that his initials are NY, and he is not a fan. He says, "I believe in co-response just like you, Jay." I said, "Oh, do you?" "Yeah, but not that crazy embedded response." I said, well, that is co-response." "No, no, no." And I was supposed to go to his presentation. They were doing a panel, and I have no problem saying this because I got very vocal in the meeting. I wasn't going to go because I was like, I'm angry. And I said, why am I going to be angry? Why don't I go to this? There's going to be a couple hundred people in this auditorium. And professionally, I'll express my opinion when I hear theirs. And I get it. There's been a lot of issues that have happened when police arrive alone on the scene or even with a clinician that have made the news. Horrible.
Mhm.
People lost lives. But what don't hit the news are all the situations that an officer sat down with someone, has talked with someone. But there's some scenarios given, and you got to realize a controlled environment. Oh, well, this person calls this number, and we don't know if they've got a weapon, and no weapon. And it's like multiple questions come to mind. What do you mean no weapon? They're in a room. What do you consider a weapon? A knife or a gun? I mean, a curling iron can be in a room. Not to go into an hour thing I could on this, but a guy turned around to me and he was anti co-response, like embedded co-response, as they call it. He's like, well, what would you do? Like if you went with the clinician to this nonviolent situation, what would you do? I said, what would I do? I was staging my cruiser or outside and let the clinician walk up to the door. Well, why would you even need to be there? Well, if I let a clinician respond by themselves over there, and once again, my opinion, and then things go sideways, not saying they will, maybe 99% of the time they won't, but if they go sideways, and that clinician, maybe they walk in the door, they're sitting on their bed, they've got it totally de-escalated, and the unpredictability changes. Who's going to call 911 now? We've got a
Right.
person in a room. We've got officers going to other calls. We could have had an officer staging outside that could go upstairs. And the guy looked at me. He's like, oh, well, that's a good point. To go, yeah, I'm not forcing the situation. I'm not forcing in there making a and it always comes back to, well, the lethal situation of it. We don't want to make anything lethal. But that's what I had to explain to one of these doctors. I go, was like, what are you going to do there? And everyone's talking about we can use lethal force. We can use lethal force. No, yeah, no kidding. We're the police. Yep, that's something entrusted to us by the public and by the government. We can use lethal force. But why is that the first thing you're thinking of? Because myself and the officers that I work with,
Absolutely.
they're not thinking about that. They're thinking, God Almighty, please. I do not want to use what's on my right or left side. I never want to use lethal force. And I can say that for 99.99999% of officers. No one wants to. I can even say in a situation like that, no one wants to use any of the tools on their tool belt, being a taser or pepper spray or whatever tools that officers is authorized to carry. Why do I want to escalate the situation? Could it come to that because of certain factors that bring us up to the scale of use of force what we're trained on? Sure. Is every area of the country the same with policing? No. But no one wants to bring it to that lethal force. But everyone, the first thing you think of is, well, you're going to go in that door before the clinician and you have lethal force. Last thing I want to do. Plus, I want the clinician to go in there first, but I want to make sure they're safe. And if it's safe, I walk away. I'll go downstairs and talk with the family member and let the clinician do what they're trained to do. I don't want to step in. I'm not a clinician. I may never be a clinician, a therapist, anything. That's not my job. But I think they're there for us and we need to be there for them.
100%. And that's kind of where I stand too. I don't mind going in with a mental health as a mental health person. And if it needs to be escalated, I have my tools in my tool belt, which was usually nothing but a pen, but I can also use, ways to de-escalate situations. Mental health, and I think of Caitlin in particular here that you work with on a regular basis, but there's other people that I've worked with in the past. There's been so many. I'm not going to try to name them all, from Amanda to Abby to obviously Dr. Abbott and others. We learn how to de-escalate our own way. And it's always for us, it's from the less restrictive to the most restrictive. And again, call me crazy, but that's kind of the training you guys go through too. You don't go in, you're like, oh, you got a ticket, let's pull the gun out. There's no threat. You're checking in. But then if it escalates and you escalate and you escalate, but no one wants to get to the point where, I've got to use, and I've never done that with the police, obviously, and I hope I never have to do this. But I know how to do restraints, and I have been trained to do restraints if I have to. But knock on whatever this wood is here, I've never had to do that. I think that what the medical profession, particularly mental health, sometimes don't understand is that our goals is to de-escalate too, just like the police. But they assume that police are trained to go shoot guns or pull out their taser or their pepper spray or whatever. I mean, I'm exaggerating, but you get the point here. I agree with you. It's like, why is it not intuitive for a lot of people, that even police officers that I know, they're like, I've heard some of my clients even say to me, sometimes it pisses me off, and that means hurt my feelings, but they don't say those words, that people think that the first thing in my mind is to pull out a weapon or try to escalate the situation. I'm doing everything in my power to have to like shake hands the guy at the end, and he turns around voluntarily if I have to bring him to the I got to arrest him, and make it so easy for me. We don't look to escalate. And I think that maybe that's the perception that affects some people too. And maybe that's what that doctor thought also.
Yeah, no, it's true. Some of the scenarios were off the wall, and we could do a whole show on that class alone. But what helped me was I was getting pretty amped up in there, and I was writing down questions feverishly, and they didn't answer any of my questions. And I called my wife and I said, "They're not answering me. You told me to go to this class." And my buddy from that large city out in Washington, uh, he started asking questions also, and it was just like, this is a controlled, perfect environment that you're put in the scenario. You're saying, "Oh no, a police officer doesn't need to respond to this." Well, while I was amped up, a young lady in the back of the class stood up, and it was funny because before I get to her, there was an officer from Montana, and he's like, "What would you like us to do? My county is bigger than the entire state of West Virginia. What would
Right.
you want me to do when it takes me 2 hours to get to some calls?" And I like, a lot of us, I mean, we're close to Massachusetts, and we're in the grand scheme of things, the place I work isn't huge for a place in, say, Florida, California, Texas. But I can't imagine driving 2 hours to a call. So he brings that up, and then the savior of saviors, she's a clinician from Washington, D.C., stands up. She goes, "I got to say one thing. This is a perfect world that you're portraying, and no police should respond with us. I'm a clinician in Washington, D.C. We run 24/7. I won't go anywhere without a Metropolitan police officer. Now, they may not get involved, but I know that Metropolitan police officer. It makes me feel more comfortable doing my job. Maybe he or she's just sitting in the car or sitting in the living room or standing outside, but at least I know within a moment's notice, I've got that Metro DC person there." And once again, going back to the lethality situation that everyone seems to bring up, if that police officer comes up, maybe it is just to assist in de-escalation. Maybe it could be a hands-on situation. No one is looking at taking anyone's life. And I think the training, going back to CIT provides a great training. If you can be CIT certified in your area, do so. It shouldn't be a fight between CIT and co-response. I think we can intermingle it and work together, because all of this is more training to make the communities safer and make police response safer for those in the community. I don't think it has to be one or the other. And maybe I'm wrong. I'm not as educated as some of these people. I don't have a PhD, but I'm a big training person. If we can just intermingle it and not fight each other. I know people said, "Oh, you're a co-response guy." No, I'm not. I love co-response, but I'm not shutting you down for being a CIT quote unquote person. Let's intermingle it. Let's just keep training each other to do a better job.
Right. And that's what I think is the curiosity that every, I think, police officer, clinician should have in regards to co-response, CIT, or whatever model exists. And I think that being able to be critical and never think that one situation is going to be like the next. As and as my audience knows, I worked for a crisis team for 15 years. Yeah, there were similarities for some of these cases, but do you really think I faced the same situation exactly twice? Of course not. And that's where it's unfortunate. I think that people who can be educated also don't realize the day-to-day stuff that may occur in other stuff, especially in police. And since we're talking about police, that they're like, "Well, aren't you trained for that?" And like, well, my first response is always like, "Well, yes, technically, but you're trained to do a lot of doctor stuff. Are they all the same?" And of course not. So same thing for them. It's getting a CIT versus a co-responder model, or again, whatever model. I'm a big fan of. I don't think this is, I've been to many calls where I maybe someone we know for a while in the community who's I would go in without a police officer because I knew that bringing a police officer escalates the situation. And then at other people where you go in, and if you don't bring a police officer, it escalates the situation. So you bring the police officer. But to say that there's one scenario that's going to be repeated over and over again is just plain ridiculous, in my opinion.
And you bring up a good point, and I said it in that meeting. I go, I could be riding around with, and I brought her name up, Caitlin. I could be riding around with Caitlin. We go to a crisis call. Caitlin goes inside, and it's someone they deal with all the time. And then we're busy. We got things going on. And Caitlin looks at me. She's like, "Oh, I'm good. Maybe your department allowed you to leave as a police officer. Maybe it's department policy by department. But maybe no, I'm good with this person. This is a person I deal with all the time. Go do what you got to do. I'll call you in a bit, and you can come pick me up. It like you said, you have a rapport with that person. Maybe it's you two sitting on their porch for an hour talking. Going over some stuff, setting up supports or whatnot.
Right. And I think that this is a good jumping point here to go to something that I think me and you informally talked about is I think that every situation is different, but I also think that every officer clinician is different. You know, Caitlin, we've plugged you enough. I'm going to expect some residuals here at some point. But we talk about different people. Like I've seen clinicians work the co-response model, as you call it, JDP for me, who lasted 6 weeks, sometimes 6 months. And then you've got people who last years. And I think that resiliency is the same thing with police officers. We had a quick conversation last time about, someone who a year in says, "Oh, I don't know if I can take it. I think don't." And you had said something to the effect of, "Don't look at me to make that decision. It's got to be your own decision." I think that resiliency plays a huge factor on the mental health perspective too, because that's part of not only CIT co-response, but I think it's also for police officers. How do you feel that the resiliency plays a factor nowadays for police officers in general?
I don't know. Myself, I'm looking at developing some classes to at least bring out to my department based on some stuff I learned out in Arizona last month. The way I look at it, and I may have mentioned this before, but the city, town, municipality, chief, whatever, sheriff, commissioner is hiring you for a career. They're not hiring you to come in for a year or two. They want you to stay. They want retention, but things do happen.
Right.
I'm not a big believer. Don't quote me because someone's going to come video me. So, but there's a lot of yoga stuff popping up, and people have been on me, and I'm like, nope, not going to do it. But it's more and more veteran stuff I've heard, and we're bringing it to Veterans Treatment Court yoga. And I can't tell a veteran that's one of our clients in Veterans Treatment Court, yeah, this is great, but I leave when he walks or she walks in that room. So there's that. I don't know this girl well. I met her in Arizona. She's got a Instagram page, TAC Mobility. It was brought to me by one of my bosses. She's phenomenal. She does mindfulness, which, like I said, people are going to say, J Ball's talking about mindfulness. Yeah. Am I bought into it totally? Absolutely not. I won't lie to you. But guess what? Something works for someone. Maybe I take pieces of it. Maybe deep breathing works. I know I've worked on deep breathing. We need to finish that career, not work 1 or 2 years. We need to, yeah, some people do leave, move on to other things, but it's increasingly harder to stay a police officer. We want those people to stay the 20, 25, 30, 32 years and get through situations. I think of, and Officer Ella French from Chicago, that dispatcher. I don't know, Steve, did you listen to that dispatch call when she was shot and killed last month?
Yes.
That dispatcher. Now, no one thinks of this. Everyone will sit there and say, "Oh my goodness, that dispatcher was phenomenal." Now, people may love dispatchers, they may not. That who knows? But like I say in my class, you are a first responder. You are the first person to get that call. That dispatcher shut down an entire section of Chicago. Was listening to officers drag a dying officer out of a scene into a hospital. That dispatcher stopped everything, gave directions told the officer, "Oh
Right.
no, you can't go there. You need to go here because that's a level 1 trauma center." It's like, I wouldn't know a level 1 from 2 from 3 trauma center on the road as a police officer, but this dispatcher did. So, not to rehash that entire call, if you have a chance, whoever's listening, to listen to it, it is unbelievable what this dispatcher did. When everything's said and done at the end of the day, when Officer French passed, what happens with that dispatcher? That dispatcher was miles away, but they were in that cruiser with the officer in the back seat with her. They were listening to the shots fired officer down. I think that could be just as hard because you can't control anything. An officer on scene getting shot at or being in a life or death situation, yeah, your hands on, you can control it. Maybe you can adjust units, end it peacefully, whichever way. But being on the other end of the radio, coordinating, doing assets, the vicarious trauma, I think I'm using that correctly, the trauma that they are getting just over the radio. Oh my God. I mean,
Right. Well,
it's
it's even more than vicarious trauma. Vicarious trauma is sometimes hearing someone else's story and feeling the same trauma. She was there essentially, even though
yeah.
she was not. And, you bring an excellent point, and it's unfortunate, but we're about to wrap up here. Again, we'll have to have you next season again. It was funny because I was talking to a friend of mine who is a mutual friend of ours, Lisa, who is a dispatcher. And I was saying how much dispatchers are sometimes seen as a civilian, sometimes seen as part of the department, depending on where you are and where they're treated. But to me, if I would think that every police department that I know of in New England, at least, I can't speak for the rest of the country. You can probably, but that Chicago story. And yes, please listen to that phone call if you can. It's not a phone call. It's a recording. To me, they've always been law enforcement. I've never questioned in my mind that they're part of the departments that they're in, and they have to deal, like, she did all that, and then she probably had to go take a phone call for an overdose and say, okay, well, no, dispatch an ambulance and send someone in and still work her shift. They don't get pulled. We pull police officers. We don't always pull dispatchers when they go through significant things like that. So I think you bring up an excellent point. How do we measure resiliency, though, in that dispatcher and that officer or what have you?
Not everyone likes to do, I call them AARs, it's my military days, after action reviews. But do a SISM. Not everyone wants to be in a critical incident debriefing. I've been in them. No one wants to sit there around your peers and say, this messed you up. But what I say to that is, measuring resiliency, go to that. If you want to be staring off into the sunset, not listening to anyone, sure, but pull a person aside later. Like I say at the end of classes that I teach, listen, I don't have all the answers, but I can point you in the right direction. And I've had people call me. They don't want to raise their hands in class. I get it.
No.
That's fine. But we need to keep going and we need to breed resiliency. We need to, help each other get through situations. I've gone to officers have come to me, dispatchers have come to me. A situation I was involved in last year was really tough on myself and my family. And I found out a dispatcher was fielding most of the calls in regards to it. And that had a profound effect on them. So we need to realize that and to move forward. And whether it is yoga, whether it is deep breathing, whether it's talking with someone, encourage, if you're a leader of a police department, encourage your officers and your employees, your dispatchers, to go to someone and talk to them and don't hold it against them. Guess what? PTSD is going to happen. Maybe cumulative stress is going to happen. It doesn't mean the person's broken. It doesn't mean the person can't come back and do their job. It actually is probably going to make them stronger. Officer Tully, part of the mental health first aid, shot in the line of duty in Suffolk, New York, came back. I always talk about her. She's always someone I want to talk about. Came back, goes to the domestic violence and elder abuse unit in Suffolk, New York. Got shot, almost died, has PTSD, is diagnosed, can still do her job.
Right. I mean, I feel like this is a complete different subject in the same way. Yeah, I'll go with just to reiterate, the podcast is Finding Your Way Through Therapy. Again, Steve Bisson with Jay Ball here. What I've come to realize in my career is that I think that mental health should be the same way as physical health. When you go see your doctor every 6 months, every year, that people don't even bat an eyelash to that. They go to that, right? Well, what would be wrong? And I'm not just advocating this for police officers or first responders or sheriffs or what have you. I advocate this for everyone. Why aren't we pushing harder to have people go check in every 6 months and then normalize the whole mental health process versus always making it feel like, and yes, this is not a popular term, but please, I don't agree with this. Oh, only crazy people go to therapy. And I think that with police officers in particular, just normalizing that process. And again, that comes from leadership, that comes from politicians, like you said, sheriffs, chiefs, or even politicians and, mayors. I think that if we only, we kind of like did that and everyone had to go through it, I feel that personally, and again, maybe you can refute my point of view here or agree with it, is that if we normalized it, everyone would go to mental health and go like, hey, this is great, I can get better. But there's still huge stigmas from the different departments where, oh, well, you've been diagnosed with PTSD, I don't know if you can do your job. And I'm like, again, I'm trying to keep this family oriented, but in my first words are two letters. It starts with F and finishes with U. When I hear that, and I've never said those words to anyone in leadership, but I've said similar nice words. What do you think about that? Maybe even normalizing mental health in general so much that police officers don't see it as, oh, you got to be crazy or have to go through trauma in order to go see one.
No, you said two good words there, crazy, and you said stigma.
Right.
Because people think, oh, I'm giving this police officer a firearm. Everyone, we go back to that firearm. Well, geez, if I say I'm struggling with something, people are going to think I'm crazy. And then the stigma comes in and they're going to take my firearm away, or they're not going to trust me. Maybe they'll put me in an administrative position. Maybe they'll just tell me I got to go instead of getting the treatment. Yes, it'd be perfect to normalize things. Caitlin usually brings it up in one of our trainings, whole body health, but there is. And I'm telling every first responder, officer, dispatcher out there, I get it. Trust me. A lot of you, which to bleed into this question also, Steve, I couldn't believe how many people listened to the last podcast you and I did. And it gave me hope towards maybe some of these officers will do it, will do a check in, will just I say go for a tune-up. I don't care. I mean, maybe you go there and you talk to someone and okay, great, got that off my chest. See you later. Yeah, not everything's that easy. Maybe you do need extensive therapy. Maybe things have happened. But you're right. Why aren't we was it everything from the neck down is fine to say we get a problem with? Oh, my knee hurts. Oh, I broke my ankle. Oh, I have back pain. I had a heart attack. But if you go above the shoulders, oh no, can't be a police officer anymore.
Right. It's great.
I don't get it, but I don't get it, but I get it. We need to normalize it. I think it's listening to podcasts like this. I think I'm telling you right now, go for it, go do it. I'll stand behind any officer that wants to go get help, because I believe that it's only going to help that person get better, or a dispatcher or someone that works in that field. It shouldn't be a disqualifier or something used against you. You're looking for help, you know. But there is a
right.
stigma associated with it.
Look, I agree with you 100%. And I think I said it the last time, but it's not a message that I will ever get tired of saying. I'm a mental health counselor. And if a client happens to be an officer of any kind, whether it's correctional, whether it's sheriff, whether it's police, whatever the law enforcement they do, if I sign off saying that they're safe despite a diagnosis, as I've said to a chief before, I live in the community. Do you think I really want to send? I know they're all screwed up, but hey, give them a gun. That's fine. It's good with me. I mean, the other thing that I find particularly disturbing when I hear this, and this is my soapbox, please, me and you can kick each other off our soapbox. It's when I hear this stuff and I go, look, it's my family, it's my friends, it's my, frankly, even if it's not my police department, I feel like I worked enough with departments that I feel part of the family, so to speak. I would never put anyone's life in jeopardy if their diagnosis was so debilitating that they would be serving in our community. So I find that there's also that stigma of higher ups that don't get that that's part of what we do. And I know not everyone can understand that, but that's my soapbox from a mental health perspective. If we normalized it, get rid of the stigma, and I have in clients, and I have a few responders that come in and say, and like once in a while, every 6 months or once in a while, they'll check in like, hey, Steve, you got a few minutes next week or in 2 weeks? And I set them up, we talk, and they're good again. That doesn't make them crazy. And I'm sorry to use the word crazy. I know that's people don't like that, but for me, it's like, no, that makes them normal, that they want to process it, make sure they're not losing their marbles. But that's just me.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. And one the first part of that is trust you as a professional. Everyone will say, "Oh, I'm going to send you to the doc. I'm going to send you to this." Well, trust that professional. Like you said, you're not going to put someone on the street that could be a harm to the community to them. Maybe you do make the decision that they should be on the street right now. Well, maybe they need some time off. Don't end that career. Maybe some treatment will work. It's true, and you use the word crazy. I know it's not the greatest word. People said over it, but go seek the help you need. I don't know. It's just tough. It needs to be more normal to go speak to someone, go talk to someone.
And I think that that's where, one of the things that, as again, I say we wrapped up for the second time, but I will wrap up on this since I have my soapbox here. If you go see you're a first responder of any kind, police, fire, EMT, sheriff, whatever it is, FBI, CIA, whatever you are, you go see a therapist and you feel that it's not a good match, then move on to another therapist. I hate to break it to you. I am not the only therapist in the United States of America. There's other therapists. And I always tell people, if I'm not a match for you, shake hands. I'm going to give you three names that I trust and you can go from there. But I also would say to you and everyone who's listening right now, any officer doesn't like their therapist, then go and find someone you feel you'll relate to. I've been successful with many first responders, but I've also had a few first responders that are like, I don't like your style. And that's fine. I've never been offended by that because I am not everyone's cup of tea. I think once we have people in power who normalize mental health as much as physical health and the mind body spirit, as I think Caitlin would talk about, I think we're going to be able to go a little further and make the community understand that it's absolutely normal. They're just human beings like us. And I think that that would go a long way with the community relationships, in my opinion.
No, absolutely. I know you said we're wrapping up. I just want to say one thing, especially the first responders, but especially the civilians out there. I hate to use that word civilians, but the civilians out there. Think of it this way. Would you rather have a police officer, firefighter, first responder, whatever, going for help, understanding that they need help, or someone who bottles it up
Right.
year after year, day after day, month after month, whatever, until it just boils over? That analogy of putting the weights in the backpack till I can't hold anymore. I'd rather have officers and who I know or firefighters, dispatchers that seek the help and get help than to bottle it up. Sorry if I
100.
prolong this show, but I want to say that.
No, no, this is, we can do 4 hours if you want to, but I don't know if I have it in me. It is late where you're at. It's getting late where I'm at. But the bottom line is I agree with you wholeheartedly. And I think that that's why, part of this mental health and making it more accessible to everyone, that includes making individuals in the community, you call them civilians, whether it's police or the community, just realize that this is absolutely normal and we can do this together. And when I say we, I don't talk about me or Jay. I think about anyone. And if you need the support there, obviously if you're in Massachusetts, I know Jay has always offered his email address when I'll put in the show notes for you guys. But if you're not in Massachusetts, and Jay may have referrals for outside of this area, but if not, there is an EAP, and there is such a thing in the federal law called the Family Medical Leave, which includes mental health. And if you have concerns about that, you have unions. I just see it as a thing that we need to just talk about wide openly. And I don't know if that's a great sentence, but whatever. And just be able to have those conversations because there's not one first responder that came into me and said, you're going to stigmatize me. They're always like, oh, you made me feel normal. Well, you're normal. I think we're all screwed up in some ways. You're just screwed up in a different way. And I include me when I say that, just for the record. So anyway, Jay, again, season 3, you're going to be here again.
Oh, geez, if you'll have me, yeah, sure.
Now, this is going to be an easy sell. A lot of people, like you said, police officers listen to it, first responders listen to it. I got a lot of civilians that told me like it made it much more human to have Jay and how he talked so eloquently about mental health and how to help first responders. So I think it's just essential for us to continue doing so. If it's our little community, what was that, PSA, or we can contribute to the community understanding it more. So anything you want to add before we wrap up here?
No, I'm long-winded enough. I think we'll save it for season 3. I just appreciate you having me on. I look forward to this. I appreciate it because it's a huge subject, and I think in 2021 and going forward, it's very very important. I think not only for the communities we serve, but also for the people we work with to understand that they shouldn't be afraid to seek help if they need it.
It might be even interesting for us to bring in someone like Caitlin or Dr. Abbott, or someone who is a firefighter or EMT or paramedic, or someone from a sheriff department, even from another place in the country, just to have this like dynamic conversation. Again, I really feel that people reach out to this as very much relatable, not only for the first responders, the police in particular, but I think the community in general have been telling me so many great things about this. So just an idea, throwing it out there. But thank you, Jay, for your time. I know all the lights went out in your area right now, so you should go to bed too.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
All right. Thanks a lot, Jay.
Thank you. Good night.
Night. Well, this concludes episode 15 of Finding Your Way Through Therapy. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. What I would say is that me and Jay have a personal relationship, but rarely do we talk about work when we're outside of the podcast. So when he comes onto the podcast, I really enjoyed hearing his point of view. And I know that he shares a lot of information that he gets from working with other law enforcement officials across the country. So I hope you enjoyed that glimpse as much as I do. Next week, we are going to talk about people pleasing. People pleasing is something that a lot of people toss around right now, but I would love to demystify it a little bit, talk about how it can impact you negatively and perhaps even the origins of it. Don't forget to like and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform, this podcast. And of course, it would make me very happy to get a review on any of those platforms or even contact me directly. I love reviews. Thanks for listening.